So I've got a problem with my arcade. See this gap here? There's also a matching gap at the bottom of the cabinet. Which I can fix by pushing on the side of the cabinet. There's a similar gap over here. I've kind of filled it up with a little bit of foam, but over on the side, and again, I push on the side of the cabinet, the gap sort of closes. So it's really almost as if, to exaggerate the problem, it's almost like the entire cabinet is, instead of being 90 degrees, is kind of tilted like this, like a trapezoid. Or not a trapezoid, a rhombus? I don't know, whatever shape that is. Okay, so here's how I've attempted to fix that issue. So what I've done here is, if you look at this metal section right in here, I've added some blocks and put some hooks on this corner and up over here, which you can't really see in the camera. And between them, these kind of metal rod looking things are called turnbuckles. So basically they have a hook on either end, and there's two of them strung together here between the two hooks. And you can take a wrench and rotate this middle piece on each turnbuckle, and depending on which direction, either clockwise or counterclockwise, you rotate them, it will either pull in the two hooks or it will let the two hooks out. So basically, you can very precisely and with great strength hold together or put a lot of tension on between those two hooks that are on the corners here. So the idea here is to counteract that kind of slanted motion, I'll pull together these 2 points just a little bit, but with a lot of force, and that should kind of correct the skew. At least that's the idea. Well, my brilliant plan didn't really work, and I think I now know why. So my whole point was to correct the skew that was up here, so basically to bring this like straight, right? Well, the problem is this lower box here, which is kind of like a 2x4 cube that the sides of the arcade are attached to, that was already 90 degrees. So it was square. So as I kind of tightened the turnbuckles down there, it did eventually correct the skew that was up here and brought it to 90 degrees, but in the process, it made this cube no longer 90 degrees. So basically this door wouldn't close anymore. So it just moved the problem from here down to here. So I needed a new plan. Okay, so here's my second attempt at fixing the issue. So we're behind the arcade now. This is the backside of the TV. And what I've done here is I've put a hook into the side of the arcade. I've attached a turnbuckle and a chain that then goes over to a hook which is lower down than the first hook over here, and it's more towards the back of the arcade. Ideally, I would have put a hook up here and then put a hook way down here on the other corner, but then the chain and turnbuckle would have had to go right through the middle of where the TV is. So I couldn't really do that without coming up with some kind of elaborate system for avoiding the whole volume of the TV here. So what I did instead was just put the hook further up and kind of more towards the back of the arcade. So this, while not perfect, it does kind of pull this side of the arcade this direction enough that it sort of makes it look decent. So it fixes the problem basically, while still leaving the lower part of the arcade 90 degrees and straight. Now you'll note here, this looks a little like weird, the system. This was just using the parts that I had on hand just to test if it would work. So this is not really like the final tension system that I'm going to have here. I'm going to get a smaller turnbuckle. I'm going to cut the chain off to length right now. It's just kind of doubled over and there's a bunch of extra chain hanging. And I'm going to get some bigger, thicker hooks because this is actually bending these hooks. They're not quite beefy enough to take this amount of force. But once I do that, I think it'll be in good shape, and I'll call this good. So this tension system seems to have basically solved the problem. So, yay! Okay, so for the last thing that I want to do to fix this up, I'm going to work on this little access panel here that I use to get to the front of the TV controls. So you can kind of see from here the gap between this piece and the access door is kind of bigger down here than it is here. So now that I've got the structure of the arcade all kind of as straight as I want it, now I can sort of tackle this. So what's the right tool to use when you want to take a small amount of wood off of some area? Well, probably a hand plane. So that's what I'm going to use. So you may be asking this question, and I know I'm asking this question of, since this was my first woodworking project, how would I have done it differently now that I know a little bit more about woodworking to have corrected that skew problem from the very beginning? Well, I've thought about it a little bit, and I got it right down here on the bottom with this 2x4 cube that I constructed, because it's 90 degrees and it keeps the lower part of the arcade straight and in good shape. The problem is that as soon as it got above the cube, which the top of that 2x4 cube is here on the bottom of the control panel, up above here the sides of the arcade are the structure, and I think what happened is the plywood was just a little bit warped or something like that, and so both pieces of plywood, once they get past the support of the 2x4 structure, they just tended to kind of tilt this way a little bit. So I think to correct that, what I would have done is basically create a frame for the upper part too that the sides of the arcade could attach to, and make sure that frame was perfectly straight and 90 degrees. And then the sides of the arcade would kind of be pushed into the correct position by that frame. Oh well, that's how I would have done it. I think I've fixed it well enough now.